I'm a registered nurse in a large metropolitan hospital in Texas. 12-hour shifts, trauma cases, code blues, families crying in hallways at AM. It's not glamorous. It's exhausting. It's sacred. And I take it seriously. That night, the ICU smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I was already 6 hours into my shift when they wheeled in Mr. Davenport, a man in his late 60s, congestive heart failure, uncontrolled diabetes, and a history of non-compliance. But the real emergency? His family. Before I could even finish introducing myself, his son stepped forward. Mid-40s, expensive watch, sharp jaw, the kind of man who talks like he's always closing a deal. "You better know what you're doing," he said, eyeing my badge. "My father isn't some training dummy." I forced a polite smile. "Sir, I've been an ICU nurse for 8 years. He's in good hands." He didn't smile back. "Yeah, we'll see about that." The first insults didn't sting. Not really. I'm used to fear manifesting as anger. Families panic. They lash out. I get it. But over the next hour, it escalated. When I adjusted his father's oxygen mask, he muttered, "Don't mess it up." When I administered medication, he hovered so close I could feel his breath on my shoulder. "You sure that's the right dose?" When I charted vitals, he took pictures of my screen. And then came the comment that made my stomach tighten. "You nurses think you're doctors now." It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it. Dismissive, condescending, like I was a waitress who brought the wrong order. I swallowed my pride, because professionalism isn't optional in my job. But something inside me shifted. You see, I've missed birthdays for this career, holidays, family dinners. I've held strangers' hands while they took their last breath. I've cleaned blood off my scrubs and gone right back into another room. And here was this man who had no medical training, no understanding of what was happening, talking to me like I was incompetent. Still, I kept my composure. Until 2:17 a.m., that's when Mr. Davenport's blood pressure dropped suddenly. Alarms began screaming. I moved fast, checking for lines, adjusting medication, calling for backup. And while I was working focused, calm, trained, his son shouted across the room, "What did you do?" Every head turned. "I didn't do anything," I said firmly. "His condition is unstable. This can happen." But he wasn't listening. "You touched his meds 10 minutes ago. This is on you." My heart pounded, not from fear of the situation, from humiliation. Because suddenly, I wasn't just managing a critical patient. I was defending my integrity. And that was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't just anxiety. This wasn't fear. This man needed someone to blame. And he had chosen me. He didn't know it yet. But he picked the wrong nurse. I'm a registered nurse in a large metropolitan hospital in Texas. 12-hour shifts, trauma cases, code blues, families crying in hallways at AM. It's not glamorous. It's exhausting. It's sacred. And I take it seriously. That night, the ICU smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. Monitors beeped in uneven rhythms. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I was already 6 hours into my shift when they wheeled in Mr. Davenport, a man in his late 60s, congestive heart failure, uncontrolled diabetes, and a history of non-compliance. But the real emergency? His family. Before I could even finish introducing myself, his son stepped forward. Mid-40s, expensive watch, sharp jaw, the kind of man who talks like he's always closing a deal. "You better know what you're doing," he said, eyeing my badge. "My father isn't some training dummy." I forced a polite smile. "Sir, I've been an ICU nurse for 8 years. He's in good hands." He didn't smile back. "Yeah, we'll see about that." The first insults didn't sting. Not really. I'm used to fear manifesting as anger. Families panic. They lash out. I get it. But over the next hour, it escalated. When I adjusted his father's oxygen mask, he muttered, "Don't mess it up." When I administered medication, he hovered so close I could feel his breath on my shoulder. "You sure that's the right dose?" When I charted vitals, he took pictures of my screen. And then came the comment that made my stomach tighten. "You nurses think you're doctors now." It wasn't just what he said. It was the way he said it. Dismissive, condescending, like I was a waitress who brought the wrong order. I swallowed my pride, because professionalism isn't optional in my job. But something inside me shifted. You see, I've missed birthdays for this career, holidays, family dinners. I've held strangers' hands while they took their last breath. I've cleaned blood off my scrubs and gone right back into another room. And here was this man who had no medical training, no understanding of what was happening, talking to me like I was incompetent. Still, I kept my composure. Until 2:17 a.m., that's when Mr. Davenport's blood pressure dropped suddenly. Alarms began screaming. I moved fast, checking for lines, adjusting medication, calling for backup. And while I was working focused, calm, trained, his son shouted across the room, "What did you do?" Every head turned. "I didn't do anything," I said firmly. "His condition is unstable. This can happen. This is on you." My heart pounded, not from fear of the situation, from humiliation, because suddenly I wasn't just managing a critical patient. And that was the moment I realized something important. This wasn't just anxiety. This wasn't fear. This man needed someone to blame. And he had chosen me. He didn't know it yet, but he picked the wrong nurse. Morning came, and with it, a new opportunity. Mr. Davenport's father was stable, but his son was already prowling the ICU, ready to pounce on any misstep. I approached him with calm professionalism. "Good morning. Your father slept well, and his vitals are stable," I said. He smirked. "I suppose you just got lucky last night." I smiled softly. Luck isn't part of critical care. Understanding what we do can make all the difference. He hated being corrected by a nurse. I noticed the first cracks in his ego. That morning, I began laying the groundwork for his eventual humiliation. Every time he tried to overstep, I subtly involved the attending physician and charge nurse. His intrusive comments became increasingly noticeable in front of staff. During rounds, he questioned medication orders. Calmly, I handed over the patient chart, pointing out physician-verified instructions. The team witnessed his arrogance collapsing under the weight of facts. By mid-morning, his frustration was evident. He hovered, his voice rising, but every interjection was corrected politely, professionally, and publicly. The staff's subtle reinforcement made him appear foolish. Later, I suggested a formal family briefing, framing it as a learning experience. He agreed, thinking he would assert authority. Little did he know, administration and staff were in on the plan. At the briefing, I calmly explained each procedure, medication, and vital check. Each time he attempted to interrupt, staff politely redirected him. His smirk vanished, replaced by sputtering frustration. Every attempt to assert dominance failed, exposing his ignorance in front of everyone. By the afternoon, he avoided my eyes in the corridor. For the first time, he realized the nurse he had ridiculed wasn't just competent, she was orchestrating his downfall. And this was only the setup. The real, unforgettable humiliation was still coming. By late afternoon, Mr. Davenport's arrogance had fully unraveled. The family briefing had exposed his ignorance to the entire medical team, leaving him red-faced and stumbling over words. Every polite correction, every factual explanation I delivered, chipped away at his smug confidence. He was no longer intimidating, he was embarrassing himself. But I wasn't done. The final act required precision and patience. I knew one more step would cement the lesson. His father needed a routine, procedure that required the son to be present for consent. I volunteered to guide him through it, smiling sweetly. "Sir, you'll need to sign here. I'll explain everything as we go." He followed reluctantly, expecting to assert control. What he didn't anticipate was that I had coordinated with the attending physician and hospital administration to make this process a subtle but public reveal of his ignorance. As we reviewed the consent forms, I asked him simple questions about the procedure, what he understood, what precautions to follow. His answers were vague, hesitant, and completely wrong. I gently corrected him in front of the attending physician, charge nurse, and another nurse assisting with the procedure. "Sir," I said, calm and professional, "it's important everyone understands the risks and steps. Let me clarify." Each explanation highlighted what he had missed, without directly mocking him, yet making it obvious to anyone watching that he didn't know what he was talking about. By the end of the procedure, his ego was shattered. He realized that every attempt to control or belittle me had backfired spectacularly. What he thought was power standing over a nurse in the EQ was actually his undoing. He had looked arrogant, ignorant, and completely out of place in front of staff and administration. I finally allowed myself a quiet smile. Revenge isn't always loud or vengeful. Sometimes it's calm, precise, and leaves the offender fully aware of their own mistakes. As I walked away from the room, I felt a wave of relief and validation. The disrespect, the humiliation, the condescension, it was all repaid. Not with anger, but with professional mastery. He avoided eye contact the rest of the day, and I returned to my patients steady, unshaken, and respected not just by the staff, but now silently acknowledged by the man who tried to intimidate me. End of part. By the next morning, the ICU was back to its usual rhythm, monitors beeping, patients shifting, nurses moving with practiced efficiency. But something had changed. Mr. Davenport's son no longer hovered over his father or attempted to question my every move. The arrogance that had filled the room like a storm had been replaced with quiet, awkward compliance. The final act of my revenge was simple but symbolic. His father required a brief checkup from the attending physician. I arranged for the son to be present again, framing it as helping him understand proper care. I knew he expected to assert himself once more, but this time, the trap was fully set. As we went through the steps, I guided him with calm authority, asking questions that exposed his lack of knowledge. "What does this monitor tell us about his heart rate?" I asked. "What would you do if the oxygen dropped suddenly?" He faltered at every question. I explained each detail, each precaution slowly and patiently, while the attending physician observed. Every incorrect answer he gave was gently corrected in front of him. His confidence crumbled completely. By the time the checkup ended, he was silent, red-faced, and shrinking under the realization that the nurse he had mocked and belittled had outmaneuvered him completely. The hospital staff exchanged knowing glances, some suppressed smiles, all silently acknowledging my professionalism and strategic skill. I felt a rush of satisfaction, not from cruelty, but from justice. I had been patient, precise, and professional. I had defended my integrity without losing composure, and the disrespect he had shown me was returned, in the form of public recognition of my expertise and his glaring ignorance. Later, when the attending physician praised my thoroughness and calm handling of a difficult family situation, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Mr. Davenport's son avoided my gaze entirely, a silent acknowledgement that his attempts at intimidation had failed. Walking away, I felt a sense of vindication. Revenge isn't about anger or malice, it's about balance. About showing someone that underestimating you, disrespecting you, or questioning your competence has consequences. And in that ICU, under the harsh fluorescent lights and the constant hum of monitors, I had delivered a lesson he would never forget. Justice served, respect earned, ego humbled. Even after the incident, the tension lingered in the ICU. I went about my shift, monitoring patients, adjusting medications, and documenting vitals as usual. Yet, every now and then, I'd catch a glance from Mr. Davenport's son, a mix of resentment, embarrassment, and a begrudging respect. He knew he had been outmaneuvered, but pride makes humiliation sting long after the moment passes. Over the next few days, I maintained my professional distance. I never gloat, never showed that the upper hand had shifted. The beauty of real revenge is subtlety. It doesn't need fireworks. It speaks quietly, powerfully, and leaves a lasting mark. One afternoon, the attending physician pulled me aside. "I've noticed how you handled Mr. Davenport's family. That was impressive. Many nurses would have cracked under the pressure." I nodded politely, a small smile tugging at my lips. "It's part of the job," I replied, though inside I felt a surge of validation. This wasn't just about my ego, it was about upholding the dignity of my profession. Later, I observed the son attempting to intervene with another staff member. The difference now was stark. Where he had once approached me with arrogance, he now hesitated, unsure, tentative. I had established authority without confrontation, guiding him into a position where his own behavior revealed his inadequacy. I also took mental notes for future situations. The strategy was clear: document, involve witnesses, stay calm, and let the offender's own ignorance do the work. It's an elegant kind of revenge, one that is deeply satisfying because it doesn't compromise your professionalism. By the end of the week, Mr. Davenport's father was discharged in stable condition. The son, noticeably subdued, finally acknowledged me with a quiet, almost grudging, "Thank you." No smug remarks, No condescension, just the acknowledgement he had denied me before. That simple recognition was worth more than any dramatic confrontation could have been. As I walked out of the ICU that day, I reflected on the whole ordeal. Disrespect is a common hazard in my profession, but allowing it to go unchecked diminishes not just personal pride, but professional credibility. By handling it strategically, I had turned humiliation into a lesson for someone who thought they could intimidate me, and I knew, as long as I remained calm, methodical, and confident, anyone who tried to belittle me again would face the same fate. Subtle, undeniable, and unforgettable. Even after Mr. Davenport's father was discharged, the ripple effect of that night lingered throughout the ICU. I noticed subtle changes in the way staff interacted with families, more assertive, more confident in defending their professionalism. It was as if my handling of the Davenports had set an unspoken standard. Disrespect would not go unchallenged, but confrontation didn't have to be loud. It could be strategic, precise, and lasting. Meanwhile, the son's behavior became a case study in silent humiliation. He came in the next week, ostensibly to check on his father's follow-up care. But now, he was careful, hesitant, and self-conscious, conscious that any misstep could once again expose his ignorance. He no longer hovered over me or attempted to challenge my authority. Even his tone softened when speaking to the medical staff. The arrogance that had once filled the ICU like smoke had been completely extinguished. I made sure to maintain professional composure throughout. No sarcastic remarks, no pointed glares. The revenge had been delivered quietly, with patience and meticulous planning. His discomfort and humility were enough. One afternoon, the attending physician stopped me in the hallway. "You handled that family perfectly. I've never seen someone manage both patient care and a disruptive relative so effectively." I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "It's part of maintaining a safe environment for the patient and staff. Inside, though, I allowed myself a small private smile. Validation from peers after enduring disrespect feels far sweeter than any confrontation could." Even the staff nurses began referencing the situation subtly, joking among themselves about how the son had underestimated me. The lesson extended beyond one family. It became a quiet morale boost, reinforcing the value of professionalism, patience, and strategic thinking. In the days that followed, I reflected on the experience. True revenge doesn't have to involve malice or anger. It thrives on subtlety, foresight, and control. By maintaining composure while setting up a scenario where the offender exposed their own incompetence, I had delivered a lesson that would stay with him far longer than a shouted argument ever could. And in the quiet moments, when I reviewed the charts, monitored vitals, and guided patients through recovery, I felt a sense of calm triumph. The disrespect, the condescension, the arrogance, it had all been countered, not with recklessness, but with professionalism, patience, and quiet justice. Weeks passed, and life in the ICU returned to its usual rhythm: emergencies, code blues, and long hours. But something subtle had shifted. Staff members seemed more confident, families more respectful. The ripple effect of the Davenports incident lingered, quietly reinforcing boundaries without anyone having to say a word. I noticed the son's absence more than I had expected. He rarely came to check on his father's follow-up appointments, and when he did, he was careful, almost timid. The man who had once dominated the room with arrogance and impatience had been reduced to a shadow of himself, cautious and hesitant, aware that any attempt to assert dominance now risked public exposure of his ignorance. This was the silent, long-term satisfaction of revenge, far more enduring than a momentary outburst. He had learned, without me ever raising my voice, that respect is earned and that arrogance can be undone with calm, precise strategy. I didn't need to gloat. He already knew. I took a quiet pride in the knowledge that my actions had reinforced not just my authority, but also the morale of my colleagues. Junior nurses began approaching me with questions and advice, eager to learn how to maintain professionalism under pressure. They noticed how I had handled the Davenports and recognized the power of patience, composure, and subtle strategy over confrontation. Even the attending physicians and charge nurses occasionally referenced the incident in passing, commending me for turning a volatile situation into a demonstration of professional excellence. The validation was satisfying, but deeper than that, it was the knowledge that my revenge had been executed flawlessly, without compromising ethics or patient care. I also reflected personally. True revenge isn't about cruelty, it's about reclaiming dignity, establishing boundaries, and demonstrating competence. It's a reminder to anyone who would belittle you that power comes from preparation, intelligence, and restraint, not anger or rash actions. And so, the story of Mr. Davenport's son became a quiet legend among the ICU staff, a lesson in humility, delivered not with confrontation or loud words, but through competence, composure, and careful orchestration. By the time I walked out of the hospital each day, tired but fulfilled, I carried with me a profound sense of justice. The arrogance that had once threatened my peace had been replaced with respect, validation, and a lasting reminder that patience and professionalism can be the sharpest tools of all. Even after the Davenports had left for good, their presence lingered in my mind, not with anger, but as a reminder of how fragile arrogance can be when confronted with quiet competence. I found myself reflecting on the emotional toll of the encounter, not just on the antagonist, but on myself. It had been exhausting to maintain composure under constant scrutiny. Every insult, every whispered judgment from the son had felt like a tiny weight pressing down, testing my patience. But channeling that energy into strategic action, rather than reacting emotionally, had transformed the situation entirely. I realized that revenge, when done correctly, isn't cathartic in a loud or violent way. It's subtle, precise, and devastating in its effectiveness. Word had begun to spread subtly among the hospital staff about the incident. New nurses were warned to never underestimate the power of composure, and even long-time staff referred to the Davenport lesson in hushed tones. It was surreal, knowing that what began as personal vindication had grown into a professional example, shaping behavior without a single raised voice. I also began to notice subtle changes in the son's reputation. Through mutual acquaintances in the hospital network, I heard that he had become increasingly cautious with other staff. Meetings that he would have once dominated now proceeded without his interference, and colleagues whispered about how he had finally learned his place. It was satisfying, yes, but more importantly, it reinforced a larger truth: the consequences of underestimating someone capable, patient, and professional can last far longer than any instant confrontation. Emotionally, I felt a profound sense of closure. There was no lingering resentment, no desire for further confrontation. I had restored my dignity, protected my patience, and delivered a lesson that would resonate for months. In my mind, I replayed the moment of quiet triumph, the subtle satisfaction of watching someone's arrogance crumble under the weight of their own ignorance, with witnesses seeing the truth. That memory alone brought a smile, a private acknowledgement that justice had been served. I also realized that true power doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from preparation, expertise, and the courage to act thoughtfully under pressure. The son's downfall wasn't accidental, it was the result of careful observation, precise planning, and emotional control. And in that realization, I felt something rare: the satisfaction of knowing I had been not just a nurse, but a force of justice, subtle but undeniable, in a world that often undervalues those who quietly excel. As the days turned into weeks, life in the ICU returned to its relentless rhythm, but the incident with Mr. Davenport's son left a subtle, lasting mark. I noticed it in small ways. Colleagues who had once hesitated to assert themselves now approached families with confidence, modeling the professionalism I had demonstrated. Even patients' relatives seemed more willing to trust a staff rather than challenge every decision. The ripple effect of that one calculated revenge had extended far beyond the Davenports themselves. For me personally, the experience reshaped my perspective on confrontation and self-respect. I had always prided myself on my competence and dedication, but this situation reminded me that skill alone is not always enough sometimes. Subtle strategy, patience, and composure are what protect both your dignity and your authority. I had turned what could have been a humiliating encounter into a testament to my expertise and professionalism. The son, I discovered through whispers and hospital gossip, was still struggling to recover his reputation. Staff mentioned that he approached interactions with other medical professionals cautiously, rarely asserting himself as boldly as before. It was clear that the humiliation had left a psychological mark. Unlike a fleeting argument or an emotional outburst, this lesson would stay with him. A quiet reminder that underestimating someone who works tirelessly, quietly, and expertly can backfire spectacularly. Reflecting on it all, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't have to be dramatic, cruel, or public to be effective. It can be subtle, precise, and long-lasting. By documenting his behavior, involving witnesses, and letting the consequences unfold naturally, I had delivered a lesson that was both fair and permanent. Even more importantly, I didn't lose myself in the process. My integrity remained intact, my patients were safe, and my professionalism shone through every interaction. The satisfaction wasn't in seeing someone embarrassed. It was in restoring balance, enforcing respect, and proving that competence and patience are far stronger than arrogance and entitlement. Walking through the hospital corridors now, I carried with me a quiet confidence. I knew that if anyone ever attempted to undermine me again, I had the tools, the patience, and the strategy to handle it. And perhaps most importantly, I had learned that true vindication doesn't need anger, it needs focus, intelligence, and unwavering composure. The Davenport story ended with him humbled, me vindicated, and the ICU quietly stronger for it, a testament to the power of patience, professionalism, and subtle revenge. In the weeks following the Davenport's departure, the ICU felt different, not louder, not faster, but more respectful. Staff members moved with renewed confidence. Families were less intrusive, and the sense of hierarchy and professionalism had subtly shifted. I realized the impact of what had happened wasn't just personal. It had created a quiet cultural change within the unit. I often reflected on how I had felt that first night, frustrated, belittled, and powerless. The son's arrogance had ignited a mix of anger and determination in me, but I never allowed it to take control. Instead, I channeled it into careful planning and precise action. That emotional control had been the key to my success. It taught me that revenge is most satisfying when it is deliberate, thoughtful, and executed without sacrificing integrity. One evening, as I updated patient charts, I overheard a new nurse quietly telling another about the incident. That nurse handled the Davenport family perfectly. I would have lost it, she whispered. I smiled internally. It was gratifying to know that my actions had become a model for composure under pressure. Meanwhile, the son's behavior continued to reflect the consequences of his arrogance. He rarely challenged staff now, and when he did speak, it was hesitant, almost apologetic. His confidence had been replaced with caution, a subtle but unmistakable acknowledgement that his earlier disrespect had repercussions. I realized then that the real power of revenge lies in its subtlety. It doesn't need loud confrontations, harsh words, or visible rage. It's the quiet victories, the moments where someone's own behavior exposes them, that are most satisfying. My revenge was complete not with dramatic spectacle, but with undeniable lasting impact. Even personally, I felt a deep sense of closure. I had defended my dignity, proven my competence, and reinforced the respect due to anyone who dedicates themselves fully to their work. The humiliation and disrespect I endured had been transformed into empowerment for myself and for the team around me. And as I walked past the empty bed where Mr. Davenport's father had stayed, I smiled to myself. The son had learned his lesson, my patients remained safe, and I had reclaimed not just my authority but the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing justice can be delivered thoughtfully, professionally, and effectively. Over the following weeks, the aftermath of the incident continued to reveal its subtle but powerful effects. The ICU staff had quietly shifted. New nurses approached me with questions and sought guidance on how to handle difficult families. The Davenports' ordeal had become more than just a personal victory. It had set an example of professionalism, patience, and strategic thinking. I noticed how colleagues, who had once felt powerless in the face of Aggressive or condescending family members began asserting themselves. They learned, almost instinctively, to document interactions, involve appropriate staff, and maintain composure while allowing the consequences of disrespect to unfold naturally. In many ways, my calculated approach had empowered the team without a single overt confrontation. As for Mr. Davenport's son, the change in him was unmistakable. Each subsequent visit he made was cautious, hesitant, and respectful. Where he had previously sought to dominate and belittle, he now measured every word, aware that his knowledge and arrogance had been exposed. It was satisfying not in a vengeful sense, but as confirmation that patience and expertise could dismantle pride without drama. Personally, the experience left me with a renewed sense of confidence. I had learned that true power lies in composure and planning, not in anger or retaliation. The emotional satisfaction of seeing someone humbled through their own behavior was profound. I realized that revenge, when executed thoughtfully, can reinforce boundaries, protect dignity, and even educate the offender. I also reflected on my own emotional growth. That night of tension, humiliation, and professional pressure had tested me like few situations ever had. I had transformed frustration into strategy, anger into precision, and disrespect into validation. It was a reminder that adversity is not only a challenge, it's an opportunity to demonstrate strength, intelligence, and integrity. Even in quiet moments, as I checked monitors or adjusted medications, I felt the lingering sense of triumph. The son had been humbled, my dignity restored, and the ICU team subtly reinforced in professionalism. It wasn't about pride, it was about justice delivered calmly and effectively, leaving a lasting impression that would endure far beyond the brief moments of conflict. The Davenport story had ended, but its impact remained a testament to strategic revenge, patience, and the quiet power of competence over arrogance. Looking back now, what stays with me isn't his insults. It's the moment his voice changed. That subtle shift from arrogant and dismissive to cautious and controlled. The last time I saw him in the ICU hallway, he stepped aside to let me pass. No smirk, no condescending tone, just a quiet nod. "Thank you for taking care of my dad," he said. Not loud enough for attention, not dramatic, but real. And that's when I knew the lesson had fully landed. Because humiliation fades, ego recovers, but awareness lingers. He had walked into that ICU believing money, confidence, and volume made him powerful. He thought proximity to a hospital bed gave him authority over the people saving his father's life. But what he learned slowly, publicly, and painfully was that competence doesn't shout. It doesn't argue. It simply performs and lets reality expose ignorance. What made the revenge satisfying wasn't watching him struggle to answer basic medical questions. It wasn't the red face or the awkward silence during briefings. It was control. I never lost mine. Every insult he threw at me could have triggered an emotional reaction. I could have snapped. I could have complained. I could have demanded he be removed from the floor. But instead, I let him keep talking, let him overstep, let him underestimate me. And then I let the system, the structure of expertise, documentation, and professionalism do what it does best. Reveal truth. By the end, I didn't need to prove I was competent. He proved it for me. Every time he hesitated to speak, every time he looked to me for confirmation, every time he chose silence over challenge. That's the kind of revenge that lasts. Not loud, not reckless, not cruel, strategic. And the most powerful part, I walked away unchanged in my integrity. No complaints filed against me, no disciplinary meetings, no guilt, just quiet respect from staff, from leadership, and from the very men who tried to diminish me. And that's when it truly clicked. The best revenge in a professional world isn't destruction, it's elevation. There's a strange kind of silence that follows justice. Not the loud, cinematic kind with applause or dramatic music. Just quiet. The steady hum of hospital lights. The soft rhythm of monitors. The sound of your own footsteps echoing down a hallway after a long shift. That's where this story truly ends. Not in confrontation. Not in shouting. But in calm. I remember clocking out that evening, exhaustion settling into my shoulders. The same hospital doors slid open. The same Texas heat wrapped around me. But I felt different. Lighter, because the disrespect that once burnt in my chest had been replaced with something steadier. Confidence. The truth is, in healthcare, especially as a nurse, you get underestimated a lot. People see the title and assume hierarchy. They don't see the years of training, the split-second decisions, the emotional resilience it takes to hold someone's life in your hands. He didn't see it either, until he had to. And that's the lesson. You don't always have to fight to win. Sometimes you let someone reveal themselves. Sometimes you document. Sometimes you educate. Sometimes you simply stand firm long enough for arrogance to collapse under its own weight. Revenge, when done right, isn't about harming someone. It's about restoring balance. It's about reminding people without screaming that respect is not optional. Weeks later, I heard his father was recovering well. And oddly enough, that mattered to me more than anything else. Because through all of it, I never lost sight of my real job. Patient first, ego never. And that's why this revenge was so satisfying. Not because he was humiliated, but because I stayed professional. I stayed composed. I stayed excellent. And in the end, that's what humbled him. So if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been talked down to, if someone's ever tried to make you feel small in a room you earned your place in, remember this. You don't need to be louder. You need to be better. And let time do the rest.